In these days, I'm feeling pretty bombarded with angst. The political mess, the climate crisis, the violence and hatred that continues to rear its ugly head throughout our world, the injustice, the oppression. It's a lousy way to start a message, isn't it? But it's true. Throughout history, there have been hard times, and these are ours to deal with. Sometimes I admit I have to put down my books on climate change that I've been reading for our climate conversations, and sometimes I tune out the news of the day and do something completely different. Hence, I've torn apart what we call our shed chamber. It's like an attic space that has had tons of stuff thrown up there for years and years and disorganized, and that's where I've been spending 3 weeks, every day up there in the cold, but organizing, getting rid of stuff, throwing things out that we don't need. The diversion has helped clear my head and set me back on a stronger footing. And I have to admit it's been beneficial in many ways for getting things cleaned out and organized, and good for my health because I found myself doing a lot more serious meditation and then walking with my dog in the fields on long walks. It's my search for peace in this troubled world. Perhaps you understand what I'm talking about. Perhaps you are doing your own things to search for peace in the midst of the challenges that we face daily. And how significant this place is, this community of faith, what it means in that search for peace for me and perhaps for you. Perhaps that's why you're here. You know, I've told you before that I grew up in church. My mother was church secretary since I was in kindergarten until she passed away when I was 25 years old. And my father was very involved in all the leadership positions in the church, as well as my mother in the youth group. And we had to go to church every single Sunday, youth groups all the time, church suppers, youth, choir events, youth events, everything events. And we had church up to here as I was a kid. And so, not uncommonly, when I went off to be on my own and spread my own wings, I soared away from church, feeling that I didn't need it in my life. It wasn't until I had my first child, Erin, whom you know, many of you know, that I felt this tug in my heart to return to my faith community, a faith community. I said I wanted to do it for my children, but in the reality, when I look back on it now, I was really doing a lot of it for myself. I needed that connection. There is nothing more reassuring than to be part of a community like this in which we feel loved, we feel supported, we feel cared about and cared for, and in which we know hope and peace and joy. There is incredible strength in being together. This you know. There is immeasurable peace. I'm reminded of a piece of artwork I saw several years ago. It was a painting, and it was a picture of a tall cliff along the ocean. And there was a storm brewing in the clouds. You could see it. The wind was blowing hard, and the waves were crashing against the rocks. It was one of those images that, wow, it was powerful, and it's, let's, get out of here situation. You wouldn't want to be in this storm. And yet, as you look closer in this painting, you saw there, in a crevice, out of the way from the wind and the weather, was a bird's nest. And there was an adult bird on top of a little fledgling underneath with its head peeking out. It conveyed peace and deep comfort and hope amidst the storm. And to me, that's an image of our faith as hope and a power greater than our individual selves sustains us, holds us fast when we falter, strengthens us when we feel overwhelmed, brings assurance in the midst of doubt, peace deep within, contentment of the soul, deep satisfaction and calm that allows us to be truly present to ourselves and to others. That is what our faith does. Our faith in something at work in our world that is greater than us individually and more powerfully revealed in community, are working together, praying together, just being together. And that we are going to celebrate today in our annual meeting and celebration. And the beauty in that is the reality that we are not all the same. It would be miserable if we were all the same. But we aren't. We don't look at circumstances around us in the same way. We cast our votes differently. Our beliefs have evolved differently over time. We don't always agree with each other. And yet, we have discovered a common thread of love and promise that weaves us together as one in meaning and in purpose. In the words of James Findlay regarding the power of giving ourselves over to this divine love that weaves its way through us, he says, "In the freedom with which you freely choose to give yourself in love to the love that gives itself to you, in that reciprocity of love, your destiny is fulfilled and God's will for you is consummated. That all of life, when you distill it out to its simplest terms, it has to do with the intimate, always utterly personal way that each of us serendipitously stumbles upon this great truth. When everything is said and done," he goes on, "only love is real. Only love endures. Outside of love, there is nothing at all." The gospel lesson we heard a few minutes ago reminds us of the change that washes over us when we encounter and receive divine love in our hearts. That is the symbolism of Peter's name change in our gospel story today. And we see it throughout the biblical narrative. Abram becomes Abraham when he encounters God. Sarai becomes Sarah. And there are many more. When we are touched by God's grace, we are changed in heart, mind, and soul. A sense of wholeness envelops us. Our true selves are revealed, and we become aware of an inner peace that fills us beyond measure. It is the same that motivated the praise and thanksgiving that we heard in the expression from our psalm this morning. Something truly wonderful wells up inside of us. We recognize a greater, deeper meaning for our lives, and that becomes our motivation and our hope. The psalmist writes, "God put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise." It is out of that praise, that heart song, that people of faith act, filled with deep gratitude and ultimately deep peace. Several years ago, I came across a fantastic story that I'd like to share with you now that conveyed such peace and contentment, that unfolded into compassion and kindness. The story took place in 1953 at the Chicago Railroad station. A man who was there to receive the Nobel Peace Prize had just arrived and stepped off the train. A tall man with bushy hair and a big mustache. As the cameras flashed and city officials approached with hands outstretched to meet him, he thanked them politely, and then he asked to be excused for a minute. He walked through the crowd to the side of an elderly woman of color who was struggling with her large suitcases. He picked them up, he smiled, and escorted her on to the bus, helped her get on and wished her a safe journey. Then Albert Schweitzer turned to the crowd and apologized for keeping them waiting. It is reported that one of the people that was there in that company of that visit, that was a reporter who said, "That's the first time I ever saw a sermon walking." A sermon walking. What a concept. What a compliment. to be a living, breathing example of faith in action and deed. Beyond words, doing. That is exactly the point of messages, isn't it? In our gathering here, not so much everything I have to say, but our prayers, our music, the songs we sing, our thoughts as we share together. A sermon walking. A living, breathing, acting, and doing example of God's love. Albert Schweitzer, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, so many names could come to mind. Those who we recognize on their grand scale of doing that have gone down in history books. But there are many more whose names we hardly know, or maybe we'll never know. There's a man I met in Norwich, Connecticut, Dr. Jeremy Lowney. He's a dentist. But back in 1982, he went to Haiti to do some work among the people there and donate some of his time. And from that moment on, he dedicated his life to going back year after year on multiple trips, ultimately setting up a foundation, the Haitian Health Foundation, to help people in a little town, a very poor, impoverished town. And I had the opportunity to visit in Jeremy, Haiti. He changed their lives more than their teeth. Or a family that every Thanksgiving, a family I knew in Connecticut, that every Thanksgiving did multiple Thanksgiving baskets for people in need in their community. Or the crossing guard that used to cross my young children to the school every morning. An older, retired man with a huge smile on his face and always saying something positive to the children that morning. A sermon walking. Surely others come to mind in your thinking today as we gather here. Even this church, a little church with a big heart, a little church with enormous faith. A sermon walking, we can be that, we are that every time we share God's love. We are that when we find inner peace, when we follow the lessons that Jesus taught about living in love and compassion. It begins with gratitude. When we are truly thankful for what we have, we act differently. And we want others to share in that joy as well. If we were to poll all of these people, Schweitzer, Gandhi, and Jeremy Lowney, and whoever we can think of, if we could poll them and ask what their motivation is, I would imagine it would be gratitude. Gratitude for life and an inner peace within that drives them to share with others. A few years ago, I read the book called The Hidden Life of Trees. It's a fascinating book, and one that has revealed a form of communication among these trees. How when giraffes, if you haven't read it, it's quite interesting, how giraffes would come along and eat from a particular tree in a given area, and suddenly those very similar type trees in that vicinity would somehow internally change the flavor of the leaves so that it was distasteful to any of the giraffes that would venture over to those other trees. It seems ridiculous and hard to comprehend. And yet what science has discovered is that there's this network underneath the soil, this network of like a nervous system within the soil called mycelium. And they transmit chemical responses. So indeed, these things are true. That these things can happen and they communicate with one another. And when I thought of that image, I thought about the love that weaves its way through us. This communication system, these threads that go through our lives and weave us together and wind us and bind us together in such beautiful ways. Our faith has been built on something similar in the way in which the presence of love unites us, connects us, draws us together in the profoundness of community and the discovery of peace. Finding peace is in the knowledge that we are part of something greater than ourselves. An immeasurable goodness that is woven throughout history that unites each of us in community with one another. As we celebrate our church today during our annual meeting, May we become more profoundly aware of the significant presence we have in this community, here and now, in each other's lives, and the profound peace that we know and are eager to share. Peace within, peace unending.